Hey guys, tonight we begin with Victorian bedrooms and their hidden reality. For decades, these weren't just places of rest. They were spaces saturated with body odour, chamber pot stench, and desperate attempts to mask smells that never quite went away. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from and what time it is for you. It is always fascinating to see who is joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. What if I told you that most Victorian people bathed fully only a few times per year? What if you discovered that the typical Victorian bedroom smelled of unwashed bodies, stale perfume, and the contents of chamber pots that sat mere feet from where people slept? What if you learned that the elegant bedrooms you see in period dramas were actually spaces where layers of odour accumulated day after day, week after week, creating an atmosphere that would make most modern people gag within minutes? Tonight, you are going to discover what Victorian bedrooms actually smelled like and why. You are going to learn exactly how that mixture of body odour, powder, and waste created an atmosphere that Victorians lived with every night. You are going to meet real people who wrote about these smells in their diaries and letters, revealing the uncomfortable truth behind the elegant facade. And you are going to understand how attitudes toward cleanliness, privacy, and the body itself created bedroom conditions that would be considered intolerable today. According to research by Professor Ruth Goodman from the University of Leicester, whose work examines daily life in Victorian England, the Victorian bedroom was a space where multiple sources of odour converged and intensified. Unlike modern bedrooms that are typically well ventilated and regularly cleaned, Victorian bedrooms were often stuffy, inadequately aired, and saturated with smells from unwashed bodies, chamber pots, and the various powders and perfumes used to mask natural odours. Professor Goodman's research reveals that Victorians bathed far less frequently than modern people assume. The elaborate bathrooms you see in Victorian mansions were status symbols that saw relatively little use. Most people, even wealthy Victorians, took full baths only once a month at most, and many bathed fully only a few times per year. Daily washing involved a basin and pitcher in your bedroom, and you would wash only your face, hands, neck, and perhaps underarms, not your entire body. According to Professor Goodman, this infrequent bathing meant that Victorian bedrooms were permeated with the smell of unwashed human bodies. You would go to bed each night carrying the accumulated odours of days or weeks without a full bath. Your night clothes would absorb these odours. Your bed linens would absorb them. The curtains around your bed, heavy fabric that was rarely washed, would trap and concentrate them. The bedroom became a space where body odour layered and intensified night after night. Professor Goodman's research documents specific descriptions of Victorian bedroom odours. A diary entry from 1867 by a London governess named Elizabeth Hammond describes entering her employer's bedroom in the morning and being hit by what she called the close smell of the night, a mixture of unwashed bodies, stale breath, chamber pot odours, and the heavy scent of hair pomade. Hammond wrote that she always opened windows immediately upon entering bedrooms in the morning, but that even with airing, the particular smell of inhabited rooms persisted. Think about what this means for your nightly experience in a Victorian bedroom. You climb into bed wearing a nightgown or nightshirt that you've worn for several nights already, that carries the smell of your unwashed body from previous nights. Your sheets haven't been changed in a week or more. The room smells of your own body odour mixed with the perfume or pomade you applied to try to mask it, mixed with the smell of the chamber pot under your bed or in the corner. This is your sleeping environment, night after night. Let me tell you about body odour specifically and how it accumulated in Victorian bedrooms. According to research by Professor Sally Shuttleworth from Oxford University, whose work examines Victorian attitudes toward the body, Victorians had complex and often contradictory views about bodily cleanliness. They valued the appearance of cleanliness, clean visible skin, well-groomed hair, fresh-looking clothing. But they believed that frequent full bathing was actually unhealthy, that it weakened the constitution and made you vulnerable to illness. Professor Shuttleworth's research reveals that Victorian medical advice actively discouraged frequent bathing. Medical texts from the 1850s through the 1880s warned that bathing more than once a month could be dangerous, that hot baths were particularly risky, and that vigorous scrubbing of the skin could damage its protective functions. This medical advice meant that even health-conscious Victorians avoided frequent full baths, believing they were protecting their health by staying dirty. According to Professor Shuttleworth, this created a situation where body odour was simply accepted as normal. You would smell of sweat and accumulated body oils that hadn't been washed away in weeks. In summer, you might sweat heavily during the day, and that sweat would dry on your skin and in your clothing. In winter, you would wear heavy woolen clothing that trapped perspiration and body oils. All of this would come with you to bed, and your bedroom would smell of it. Professor Shuttleworth's research documents specific Victorian descriptions of body odour. A medical text from 1871 describes the natural effluvia of the human body and notes that in bedrooms, this odour becomes particularly concentrated during the night when the body is at rest and enclosed in bedclothes. The text recommends opening windows even in winter to dissipate the vitiated air of the sleeping chamber, but acknowledges that most people kept windows closed because they believed night air was dangerous. According to Professor Shuttleworth, the Victorian understanding of smell was different from our modern understanding. They believed that bad smells, what they called miasmas, could actually cause disease, so they tried to mask bad smells with good smells, believing this would protect their health. But they didn't connect the source of bedroom odours, unwashed bodies and chamber pots, with the need for better hygiene. They just tried to cover the smells without addressing the causes. Think about lying in your Victorian bed aware of your own body odour, but believing that bathing more frequently would make you sick. You are breathing air heavy with the smell of unwashed skin and hair, trapped in a room with closed windows because fresh night air is considered dangerous. The smell is so normal to you that you barely notice it anymore, except perhaps on the hottest summer nights when the intensity becomes overwhelming. Now let me tell you about the specific smells of unwashed bodies and how they layered in Victorian bedrooms. According to research by Professor Virginia Smith from the University of London, whose work examines the history of cleanliness, unwashed human bodies produce a complex mixture of odours that intensify over time. Sweat from armpits, groin and feet contains bacteria that break down oils and proteins, creating distinctive smells. Sebum from scalp and skin accumulates and becomes rancid. Dead skin cells accumulate and decompose. Professor Smith's research reveals that after a week without bathing, body odour becomes quite noticeable. After 2 weeks, it is strong and unpleasant to anyone not accustomed to it. After a month, the typical interval between Victorian baths, body odour is intense and pervasive. The smell isn't just on your skin, it is absorbed into your hair, your nightclothes, your bed linens. Everything you touch carries your scent. According to Professor Smith, Victorian bedrooms would smell particularly strongly of underarm and genital odours, because these areas produced the most intense body smells and were areas that Victorians rarely washed thoroughly. Women's armpits were concealed under layers of clothing and were washed perhaps once a week at most. Men might wash their armpits more regularly if they did manual work, but gentlemen often went days without washing these areas. Genital areas were washed infrequently because of modesty and because thorough washing required privacy and equipment that wasn't always convenient. Professor Smith's research documents that hair contributed significantly to bedroom odours. Victorian women wore their hair long and elaborate, often styled with pomades and oils. These hairstyles might remain in place for a week or more between washings. The combination of unwashed hair, scalp oils, hair product, and absorbed environmental odors created a distinctive smell that would be particularly noticeable on pillows and around the head of the bed. According to Professor Smith, Victorian men's hair also contributed to bedroom odor. Men used heavy pomades and oils to keep their hair in fashionable styles. These products were often animal fat-based and would become rancid over time. A Victorian gentleman might apply pomade daily to hair that he washed only once a week or less, meaning his hair carried layers of fresh and rancid pomade, mixed with natural scalp oils and sweat. Think about the smell around your pillow in a Victorian bedroom. Your unwashed hair, heavy with oils and product, rests on a pillowcase that hasn't been changed in over a week. The fabric has absorbed previous night's worth of hair oil, scalp smell, and the drool and breath of sleep. When you put your face near your pillow, the concentrated smell of unwashed hair and fabric is intense. Let me tell you about the powders and perfumes Victorians used to mask body odor and how these smells layered in bedrooms. According to research by Professor Holly Dugan from George Washington University, whose work examines scent history, Victorians used a variety of strongly scented products specifically to cover body odor. These included lavender water, rose water, violet powder, orris root powder, and various perfumes made from synthetic and natural ingredients. Professor Dugan's research reveals that Victorian perfumes and powders were much stronger than modern equivalents because they had to mask significant body odor. A Victorian woman might dust her entire body with scented powder before dressing, apply perfume to her neck and wrists, and tuck shades of lavender or orris root into her clothing. A Victorian man might use heavily scented pomade in his hair and bay rum or cologne on his face and neck. All of these scents would come to bed with you. According to Professor Dugan, the combination of heavy perfumes and underlying body odor created a distinctive smell that many Victorian sources describe. It wasn't the clean, fresh scent of modern perfume on recently washed skin. It was perfume mixed with the smell of sweat, sebum, and bacterial breakdown, a heavy, musky, complex odor that some found pleasant and others found cloying or nauseating. Professor Dugan's research documents specific Victorian perfume combinations and how they smelled in bedroom contexts. Lavender water was extremely popular because its sharp, clean scent could cut through body odor effectively. But lavender water mixed with sweat created a distinctive smell, floral but also slightly sour, medicinal but also organic. Rose water had a sweeter, heavier scent that could become oppressive in a closed bedroom. Violet powder, popular for the body, created an intensely floral smell that mixed with body oils to produce a thick, almost powdery, fatty scent. According to Professor Dugan, men's grooming products contributed their own distinctive smells to Victorian bedrooms. Bay rum, a popular aftershave and hair tonic, had a spicy, almost medicinal smell. Hair pomade made from bear grease or other animal fats had a distinctive fatty, slightly rancid smell even when fresh. Tobacco smoke clung to men's hair and clothing and would fill bedrooms with its distinctive odour. A Victorian gentleman's bedroom might smell of bay rum, pomade, tobacco, and male body odour in complex combination. Professor Dugan's research reveals that these masking scents never fully covered body odour. They just layered over it. A Victorian bedroom would smell of unwashed bodies and perfume, not of perfume instead of unwashed bodies. The perfume would be strongest immediately after application, but as hours passed and you moved through your day into evening and bed, the underlying body smells would become more prominent while the perfume faded. Think about climbing into bed after a long day, your body dusted with powder or scented with pomade, but underneath those artificial smells, the accumulated odour of days without bathing. Your bedroom smells of this same combination, floral or spicy surface notes over a base of human body smell. When you pull the bed covers up around you, you trap these smells in the enclosed space of your bed, breathing them all night. Now, let me tell you about chamber pots and how they contributed to Victorian bedroom odours. According to research by Professor Judith Flanders from the University of London, whose work examines Victorian domestic life, chamber pots were standard bedroom furniture in Victorian homes. Even wealthy houses with indoor plumbing often had chamber pots in bedrooms, because going to the bathroom down the hall in the middle of the night was considered inconvenient or improper. Professor Flanders' research reveals that chamber pots sat in Victorian bedrooms continuously, often barely concealed under beds or in special furniture called commodes. During the night, you would use the chamber pot for urination and sometimes defecation. The pot would then sit in your bedroom until morning when a servant removed it, or in less wealthy homes, until someone in the household dealt with it. This meant that bedrooms regularly contained fresh urine and sometimes feces for hours. According to Professor Flanders, the smell of chamber pots was one of the most prominent odours in Victorian bedrooms. Urine begins to smell strongly within an hour or two, as bacterial action breaks down urea into ammonia. The smell intensifies as the urine sits. If you used your chamber pot at 11 p.m. and it wasn't emptied until 7 a.m., that is 8 hours of increasingly strong ammonia smell in your bedroom, and this happened every single night. Professor Flanders' research documents Victorian descriptions of chamber pot odours. A diary entry from 1873 by a Yorkshire woman named Margaret Ashworth describes waking in the middle of a winter night and being aware of the sharp smell of the pot in her cold bedroom. She wrote that in winter, when windows were kept tightly closed against cold, the smell of night necessities was particularly strong by morning. She noted that opening windows in the morning released a rush of close, ammoniac air. According to Professor Flanders, chamber pots contributed to bedroom smell even when empty, because the porcelain or ceramic absorbed odours over time. A chamber pot that was used nightly and washed daily would still carry a faint smell of urine, even when clean. This smell would intensify in the enclosed space of a bedroom, especially in furniture where the pot was hidden in a closed cabinet that trapped odours. Professor Flanders' research reveals that wealthy Victorian families had servants empty chamber pots each morning, but this didn't eliminate the nighttime smell problem. The pot would be used at night and would sit in the bedroom, smelling until morning. In middle-class homes without live-in servants, family members might empty their own pots, but often not until later in the morning after completing other tasks, meaning the pot sat full even longer. According to Professor Flanders, chamber pot etiquette created additional smell problems. Polite Victorians didn't acknowledge chamber pot use. It was something you didn't discuss or admit to. This meant you couldn't mention the smell even when it was overpowering. If you were a guest in someone's bedroom, you would use their chamber pot, and then both of you would pretend it wasn't sitting there smelling. The social fiction of not acknowledging bodily functions meant not acknowledging their odorous consequences. Think about waking in the middle of the night in your Victorian bedroom needing to urinate. You pull out the chamber pot from under your bed or from the commode, use it, and put it back. The smell of fresh urine fills the room immediately. You get back into bed and try to sleep, but the sharp ammonia smell is strong. By morning, after hours of bacterial action, the smell has intensified significantly. This is your normal nighttime experience, every night of your life. Let me tell you about the specific chemistry of how chamber pot smells intensified in Victorian bedrooms. According to research by Professor Mark Jenner from the University of York, whose work examines historical sanitation and smell, urine begins to decompose almost immediately after being produced. Bacteria naturally present in urine and on surfaces break down urea into ammonia, and this process accelerates in warm conditions and slows in cold but continues regardless. Professor Jenner's research reveals that the ammonia smell from decomposing urine is sharp, pungent, and difficult to ignore. In the enclosed space of a bedroom, especially with windows closed, as Victorians typically kept them at night, the ammonia concentration would build up noticeably. The smell would be strongest near the chamber pot but would diffuse throughout the room. creating a pervasive sharp odor mixed with other bedroom smells. According to Professor Jenner, if the chamber pot contained feces as well as urine, and Victorians did use chamber pots for bowel movements, especially at night or if unwell, the smell would be even more complex and unpleasant. Fecal matter contains numerous compounds that smell strongly offensive to humans: scatol, indole, sulfur compounds, and various volatile fatty acids. These smells mixed with ammonia from urine created what Victorians delicately called the night smell. Professor Jenner's research documents that Victorian chamber pots were often made of materials that absorbed smells. Ceramic and porcelain are somewhat porous, and repeated use would allow urine and fecal matter to penetrate microscopic pores in the surface, creating permanent odor that couldn't be fully removed even with washing. Older chamber pots, used for years, would carry a persistent smell even when empty. According to Professor Jenner, the smell of chamber pots mixed with other bedroom odors in distinctive ways. The sharp ammonia smell of urine would cut through and intensify alongside the musty smell of unwashed bodies, and the heavy floral or spicy smells of perfumes and powders. A Victorian bedroom by morning would smell of this particular combination: ammonia, body odor, and perfume, creating what some described as almost a physical thickness to the air. Professor Jenner's research reveals that Victorians tried various methods to reduce chamber pot smell. Some people put water in the pot before use to dilute urine, which helped slightly. Some used disinfectants like Condy's fluid potassium permanganate solution in the pot after use, which reduced bacterial action but added its own chemical smell. Some covered pots with cloths or lids, which contained smell somewhat but also trapped it and made it more concentrated when the cover was removed. Think about the routine of waking up in your Victorian bedroom on a cold morning. The windows are closed tight against the winter chill. The room smells of yesterday's body odor absorbed into fabrics, of stale perfume, and of the chamber pot that has been sitting since you used it in the night. When the servant comes to open curtains and empty your pot, the rush of cold air is welcome despite the chill, because it begins to dissipate the thick, close smell of the night. Now, let me tell you about bed linens, and how infrequently they were changed in Victorian bedrooms. According to research by Professor Christina Hardiment from the University of London, whose work examines Victorian household management, bed linens in Victorian homes were typically changed once a week in wealthy households, once every 2 weeks in middle-class households, and sometimes once a month or less in working-class homes. Professor Hardiment's research reveals that between sheet changes, your bed linens absorbed all the odors of your bedroom and body. Every night, you shed dead skin cells, sweat, body oils, and hair oils into your sheets and pillowcases. These accumulated day after day, and the sheets became progressively more soiled and more odorous as the week or two passed. According to Professor Hardiment, Victorian beds were often quite elaborate, with mattresses, undersheets, top sheets, blankets, coverlets, and in wealthy homes, heavy curtains around the bed. All of these fabric layers absorbed and retained smells. The bed curtains, in particular heavy fabrics that might be washed once or twice a year at most, became saturated with the accumulated smells of bodies, perfumes, and chamber pots. Professor Hardiment's research documents that Victorian mattresses contributed significantly to bedroom odour. Mattresses were typically stuffed with horsehair, wool, or straw, and were almost never cleaned. You would sleep on the same mattress for years or decades, and it would absorb years' worth of sweat, body oils, and other bedroom odours. When you moved or turned in bed, the mattress would release puffs of stale, musty-smelling air. According to Professor Hardiment, pillows presented similar problems. Victorian pillows were typically filled with feathers or down, covered in ticking, and then covered with a pillowcase. The feathers absorbed moisture and odours over time. Your pillow would smell of your hair oils, your breath, your drool during sleep, and all the perfumes or pomades you used. When you put your face on your pillow at night, You were pressing into fabric saturated with these accumulated smells. Professor Hardiman's research reveals that by the end of the week between sheet changes, your bed would have a distinctive smell, the accumulated odour of your body over 7 nights, mixed with perfumes, mixed with ambient bedroom smells, including chamber pot odours. Victorian sources sometimes refer to making the bed smell sweet as a desirable goal, which tells you that beds regularly didn't smell sweet. Think about climbing into bed on the 6th night after your sheets were changed. The sheets feel slightly gritty from accumulated dead skin cells. They smell of your body odour from previous nights, of the perfume you've applied each day, of your hair pomade, of your breath and sleep smells. When you pull up the blankets, you are pulling over yourself covers that haven't been washed in weeks or months, and that carry their own accumulated odours. Let me tell you about night clothes and how they contributed to Victorian bedroom smells. According to research by Professor Lucy Adlington from the University of Cambridge, whose work examines historical clothing, Victorians wore nightgowns or nightshirts to bed, and these garments were typically changed once a week, or even less frequently. This meant you would wear the same night clothes for multiple nights, and they would absorb and carry bedroom and body odours. Professor Adlington's research reveals that Victorian nightclothes were typically made of linen or cotton, materials that absorb moisture and odours readily. After even one night of wear, your nightgown would carry the smell of your unwashed body, your sweat during sleep, and the ambient odours of your bedroom. After a week of nightly wear, your nightclothes would be saturated with these accumulated smells. According to Professor Adlington, people noticed the smell of their nightclothes, but considered frequent changing wasteful and unnecessary. Laundry was extremely labour-intensive in the Victorian era, requiring heating large amounts of water, hand scrubbing with harsh soap, rinsing, wringing, and drying. Changing nightclothes daily would have created an enormous amount of additional laundry work, so it simply wasn't done except perhaps by the very wealthy. Professor Adlington's research documents Victorian laundry schedules. In a typical middle-class household, laundry was done once a week or once every 2 weeks. You would have perhaps 2 or 3 nightgowns or nightshirts in rotation, meaning you wore each one for multiple nights before it was washed, then wore it again for multiple nights after washing. By the 3rd or 4th night of wearing a nightgown, the smell would be quite noticeable. According to Professor Adlington, nightclothes absorbed the full range of bedroom odours, body smell, perfume, chamber pot odours, and the musty smell of the bedroom itself. When you put on your nightclothes each evening, you were putting on garments that smelled of all these things from previous nights. When you took off your day clothes and put on your night clothes, you weren't becoming fresher. You were just changing from one set of odorous garments to another. Think about your nightly routine in a Victorian bedroom. You undress, removing clothes that you've worn all day, and that smell of your body, odour, and the various environments you've moved through. You put on your nightgown, which you wore last night and the night before, which hasn't been washed in a week, which smells of sleep, sweat and body odour and bedroom smells. This is your fresh night clothes for sleep. Now let me tell you about ventilation and how lack of fresh air intensified all these bedroom smells. According to research by Professor Michelle Allen from the University of Exeter, whose work examines Victorian domestic spaces, most Victorians kept their bedroom windows closed at night because they believed that night air was dangerous and could cause illness. This belief meant that bedrooms were essentially sealed spaces where odours accumulated with minimal dilution from fresh air. Professor Allen's research reveals that Victorian medical advice specifically warned against sleeping with windows open. Medical texts from the 1860s through the 1880s claimed that night air carried miasmas that could cause fevers, consumption, and other diseases. Windows should be closed at dusk and not opened until morning, according to popular health advice. This meant that from approximately 7 or 8 p.m. until 7 or 8 a.m., Your bedroom was a closed environment with no fresh air circulation. According to Professor Allen, in a sealed bedroom, the concentration of various odors would build throughout the night. Carbon dioxide from breathing would accumulate, making the air feel close or stuffy. Odors from chamber pots would intensify. Body odors given off during sleep would accumulate. The perfumes and powders people wore to bed would blend with other smells in the enclosed space. By morning, the air quality in a Victorian bedroom would be noticeably poor. Professor Allen's research documents Victorian descriptions of bedroom air quality. A health manual from 1875 describes the air of a closed bedroom in the morning as vitiated, thick and unwholesome. It recommends opening windows immediately upon waking to let in the sweet morning air and dispel the foul vapours of the night. The language used, foul vapours, vitiated air, makes clear that Victorian bedrooms smelled bad by morning, and that this was acknowledged even if not fully understood. According to Professor Allen, some reform-minded Victorians did advocate for sleeping with windows cracked open, or for improved bedroom ventilation, but these reformers faced considerable opposition from traditional medical opinion. The belief that night air was dangerous was deeply entrenched, and many people continued to sleep in sealed bedrooms throughout the Victorian period, despite growing evidence that fresh air was actually beneficial. Professor Allen's research reveals that bedroom fires, common in wealthier Victorian homes, created additional air quality problems. The fire would consume oxygen and produce smoke and fumes that added to the mixture of bedroom odours. A fire burning low in the grate while you slept would create carbon monoxide, colourless, odourless, but dangerous, mixed with the smell of coal smoke or wood smoke. Think about lying in your sealed Victorian bedroom at 3 in the morning. The chamber pot has been used. You've been breathing and sweating for hours. The air feels thick and heavy. You can smell your own body, your bedding, the chamber pot, the lingering perfume you applied before bed, the low fire burning in the grate. You can't open the window because you believe night air will make you sick, so you lie there breathing this mixture of odours until morning. Let me tell you about morning routines and how Victorians dealt with the smells accumulated overnight. According to research by Professor Pamela Horn from the University of Oxford, whose work examines Victorian domestic service. The first task servants performed in Victorian bedrooms each morning was opening windows and dealing with chamber pots. This rush of morning activities was specifically designed to air out and clean up bedrooms after the night's accumulation of odours and waste. Professor Horn's research reveals that servants entering Victorian bedrooms in the morning would be hit immediately by the full force of accumulated bedroom smells. The morning smell that combined all the night's accumulations. A servant would throw open windows, empty chamber pots, and begin straightening the room, all while breathing air thick with the smells of bodies' waste and stale perfume. According to Professor Horn, servants in wealthy homes might perform additional tasks to freshen bedrooms, sprinkling lavender water on linens, using scented candles, even burning pastilles, scented tablets to improve air quality. These efforts would help somewhat, but the underlying sources of odour, unwashed bodies, infrequently washed linens, chamber pots, weren't being addressed, only masked. Professor Horn's research documents servants' descriptions of bedroom smells in their letters and memoirs. A lady's maid writing in 1882 described her mistress's bedroom as having a particular close smell in the mornings, and noted that even with windows open for an hour, the smell of the night remained in the curtains and carpets. Another servant memoir from the 1890s refers to the job of freshening the bedrooms, and makes clear that this was considered one of the less pleasant duties because of the smells involved. According to Professor Horn, in homes without servants, family members had to deal with their own bedroom smells. This typically meant opening windows for a period each morning to air the room, dealing with chamber pots, and perhaps tidying bed linens. But without time or help for elaborate freshening routines, middle-class and working-class bedrooms might remain noticeably odorous throughout the day. Think about waking in your Victorian bedroom on a typical morning. A servant enters and immediately opens windows, and you feel the rush of cold, fresh air cutting through the thick, close smell of the room. The servant removes your chamber pot. You don't look or acknowledge this directly, but you are aware of the sharp ammonia smell as the pot is carried past. The servant pulls back curtains and begins tidying, and gradually the room becomes more bearable as fresh air dilutes the accumulated night smells. Now, let me tell you about how these bedroom smells varied by class and how different economic levels experienced different intensities of bedroom odour. According to research by Professor Judith Flanders, wealthy Victorian families had some advantages in managing bedroom odours: servants to empty chamber pots promptly, more frequent changes of bed linens, better ventilation in larger rooms, and access to expensive perfumes and cleaning products. But even wealthy Victorians lived with bedroom odours that would shock modern sensibilities. Professor Flanders' research reveals that middle-class Victorian families faced more intense bedroom odour problems because they had fewer servants, or no servants, lived in smaller houses with less ventilation, couldn't afford frequent linen changes, and used chamber pots that might sit longer before being emptied. A middle-class bedroom might smell significantly worse than an upper-class bedroom, simply because chamber pots sat full longer and linens went unchanged longer. According to Professor Flanders, working-class Victorian families lived with the most intense bedroom odours of all. Working-class housing was often overcrowded, with multiple family members sharing bedrooms or even sharing beds. Chamber pots would be used by multiple people and might sit full for extended periods. Bed linens might be changed only once a month or less. Bathing was even less frequent than among wealthier Victorians because it required resources, water, fuel, time, privacy, that working families lacked. Professor Flanders' research documents specific descriptions of working-class bedroom conditions. A social reformer visiting London's slums in 1888 described entering a bedroom where 6 people slept and being overwhelmed by the foul air and terrible smell of the room. The report describes odours of unwashed bodies, filthy bed linens, overflowing chamber pots, and the general reek of poverty and neglect. The reformer noted that the family seemed unaware of the smell. Having lived with it so long, they no longer noticed. According to Professor Flanders, overcrowding intensified all bedroom odour problems. In a room where multiple people slept, you had multiple people's body odours, multiple people using chamber pots, accumulated odours in shared bed linens and shared nightclothes. The concentration of smell in overcrowded sleeping spaces was significantly worse than in bedrooms occupied by just 1 or 2 people. Professor Flanders' research reveals that some working-class families shared not just rooms but beds, with children sleeping together and sometimes adults and children sharing beds. A bed shared by multiple people would accumulate odours from multiple bodies, creating particularly intense smell problems. The shared nightclothes and bed linens would absorb sweat and body oils from multiple people, intensifying the odour concentration. Think about the difference in bedroom smell between a wealthy Victorian couple's spacious bedroom, with servants attending to chamber pots and linens, and a working-class family's small bedroom, where 6 people share 2 beds and chamber pots sit full because no one has time to empty them until late morning. Both situations involve bedroom odours by modern standards, but the intensity and severity vary dramatically by class. Let me tell you about seasonal variations in Victorian bedroom smells and how weather affected odour intensity. According to research by Professor Mark Jenner, summer heat intensified all bedroom odours significantly. Hot weather meant more sweating, which meant stronger body odours. Heat accelerated bacterial breakdown of urine in chamber pots, intensifying ammonia smells. Heat made perfumes and pomades, smell stronger and sometimes rancid. Professor Jenner's research reveals that summer bedrooms could become nearly unbearable. You would go to bed already sweating from the day's heat. You would sweat during the night, soaking your nightclothes and bed linens with perspiration. Chamber pot odours would be at their most intense because heat accelerated decomposition. Windows might be opened for air, despite beliefs about dangerous night air, but summer air movement was often minimal, providing little relief. According to Professor Jenner, Victorian sources frequently mention summer bedroom smells. A diary entry from August 1878 by a London woman describes lying awake at night in heat, aware of the smell of hot bodies and the pot, and wishing for cool weather. Another Victorian letter from July 1865 complains that bedrooms in summer are quite insupportable because of heat and smell combined. Professor Jenner's research documents that winter brought different but still significant smell problems. Cold meant windows were kept tightly shut, sealing in bedroom odours. You couldn't air rooms as effectively because opening windows meant losing precious heat. Chamber pots might freeze in unheated bedrooms, but in heated bedrooms they would still smell. Heavy winter nightclothes and extra blankets trapped body odours. According to Professor Jenner, winter dampness created musty smells that mixed with other bedroom odours. Damp bed linens, damp nightclothes, damp walls in poorly heated rooms, all contributed to a musty, mouldy smell that combined with body odours and chamber pot smells. The particular combination of damp mustiness and human waste, body odour, that characterised Victorian winter bedrooms was distinctive and unpleasant. Think about summer nights lying on linens damp with your sweat, the air thick and hot and smelling intensely of body odour and chamber pot, unable to sleep because of heat and smell combined. Or winter nights buried under heavy blankets in a sealed room smelling of damp and body odour and stale perfume. The cold keeping you under covers that trap you with your own smells. Now let me tell you about specific differences in male and female bedroom smells based on Victorian grooming practices. According to research by Professor Sally Shuttleworth, Victorian women and men used different grooming products and had different bodily cleanliness expectations, which created somewhat different bedroom odour profiles. Professor Shuttleworth's research reveals that Victorian women used face powders, body powders, and various scented products more extensively than men. A Victorian woman might dust her face, neck, and body with powder before bed, creating a particularly powdery floral smell in her bedroom. The combination of unwashed female body and heavy floral powder created a distinctive smell, sweet but also musty, floral but also organic. According to Professor Shuttleworth, Victorian women's menstruation created additional bedroom odour issues. Women used cloth rags as menstrual pads, which they would wash and reuse. During menstruation, soiled rags might be stored temporarily in bedrooms before washing, adding menstrual blood smell to the mixture of bedroom odours. The unwashed female body during menstruation would smell more strongly, and this smell would be present in bedrooms during monthly periods. Professor Shuttleworth's research documents that Victorian men's bedrooms had their own distinctive smells. Men used pomades and hair oils heavily, creating fatty, sometimes rancid smells. Men who smoked would bring tobacco smell to bed in their hair and nightclothes. Male body odour was often described as stronger or more pungent than female body odour, possibly because men's clothing allowed less ventilation, or because Victorian gender norms meant male cleanliness received less attention. According to Professor Shuttleworth, men's nightshirts would smell of male sweat and body odour mixed with pomade and perhaps tobacco. Women's nightgowns would smell of female sweat and body odour mixed with powder and floral perfumes. Both would smell of accumulated sleep, sweat, and bedroom odours, but the specific scent profiles were gender distinctive. Think about the gender differences in bedroom smell. The heavy floral powdery smell of Victorian women's bedrooms versus the fatty pomade, tobacco smell of Victorian men's bedrooms, both underlying the universal smells of unwashed bodies and chamber pots that all Victorian bedrooms shared. Let me tell you about children's experiences with Victorian bedroom smells and how children perceived and adapted to bedroom odour environments. According to research by Professor Carolyn Steedman from the University of Warwick, whose work examines Victorian childhood, children in Victorian families learned from earliest age that bedroom smells were normal and accepted. You grew up breathing air scented with body odour, chamber pots, and perfumes, and this became your baseline for what bedrooms should smell like. Professor Steedman's research reveals that children's bedrooms, whether nurseries or shared children's rooms, had their own distinctive smell profiles. Children bathed even less frequently than adults, often only once every 2 weeks or monthly. Children's skin and hair would accumulate oils and dirt, and children's bedrooms would smell strongly of unwashed young bodies. According to Professor Steedman, children used chamber pots just like adults, but children might have accidents or spillage more frequently, creating additional odour problems. A nursery chamber pot might be used by multiple children and might contain accident overflow, intensifying the ammonia smell. Children's nightclothes might be soiled with urine accidents, adding urine smell to the general bedroom odour. Professor Steedman's research documents Victorian children's own descriptions of bedroom smells in memoirs written as adults. One Victorian woman remembering her 1870s childhood described the nursery as having a particular smell, not unpleasant to us children, but distinct, of young bodies and night pots and the bread and milk we sometimes ate before bed. The description is telling. The smell was not unpleasant to those raised with it, showing how normalized bedroom odors were. According to Professor Steedman, children sharing bedrooms or beds would intensify odor problems through multiple bodies in close quarters. Brothers sharing a bed would create concentrated smell from 2 unwashed bodies in intimate proximity. Sisters sharing a room would have 2 chamber pots in use, potentially doubling urine smells. Nurseries with multiple children might have 3, 4, or more small bodies creating layers of child body odour in a shared space. Professor Steedman's research reveals that children absorbed Victorian attitudes about smell and cleanliness, learning not to comment on bedroom odours and accepting them as normal. A child might notice the smell of their bedroom, but would learn through parental and social modelling that this wasn't something to discuss or complain about. The smell was just part of sleeping and night time, as normal as darkness. Think about being a Victorian child, sharing a bedroom with siblings, climbing into a bed you share with a brother or sister, the sheets unchanged for over a week, the chamber pot under the bed used by multiple children, the room smelling of all your young unwashed bodies combined. This is your childhood sleeping environment, and you accept it as simply how bedrooms are. Now let me tell you about servants' experiences with Victorian bedroom smells, particularly servants who had to enter and clean rooms saturated with their employers' bodily odours. According to research by Professor Pamela Horn, servants were exposed to bedroom smells more intensely than the room's occupants in some ways, because servants entered bedrooms when odours were at their peak concentration in the morning, before any airing or cleaning. Professor Horn's research reveals that ladies' maids and valets entered their employers' bedrooms first thing in the morning, opening curtains, opening windows, removing chamber pots, and helping with morning toilet. They would breathe the full force of accumulated night smells, body odour, breath odour, chamber pot odours, perfume, all concentrated in the sealed room after hours of accumulation. According to Professor Horn, servants also handled soiled bed linens, soiled nightclothes, and chamber pots full of waste, bringing them into intimate contact with the bodily excretions and odours of their employers. A housemaid stripping bed linens would handle sheets soaked with sweat and body oils. A servant emptying chamber pots would smell urine, and sometimes feces up close, while carrying pots downstairs to disposal areas. Professor Horn's research documents servants' descriptions of these experiences in memoirs and letters. A housemaid writing in the 1880s described the unpleasant duty of the morning chambers and noted that the smell of the bedrooms before airing was sometimes very bad indeed, especially in summer. Another servant memoir refers to holding one's breath while emptying chamber pots that had been used overnight. According to Professor Horn, servants' own sleeping quarters were typically in attics or basements and had the worst ventilation and facilities in the house. Servants would attend to their employers' bedroom smells and then retreat to their own rooms, which might be even more odorous due to overcrowding, minimal facilities and poor ventilation. A housemaid might clean and air her employer's luxurious bedroom, while knowing her own cramped attic room smelled worse. Think about being a servant entering your employer's bedroom on a summer morning, opening the door and being hit with the thick, warm smell of bodies and chamber pot, pulling open heavy curtains to let in air, gathering up soiled nightclothes that reek of sweat, carrying the chamber pot carefully down the back stairs, trying not to breathe too deeply of its ammonia stench. Let me tell you about Victorian attitudes toward these bedroom smells and why they persisted despite clearly being unpleasant. According to research by Professor Virginia Smith, Victorians had complex and contradictory attitudes about smell, cleanliness, and the body that prevented them from addressing bedroom odour problems effectively. Professor Smith's research reveals that Victorians distinguished between respectable and unrespectable smells, but in ways that seem strange to modern sensibilities. The smell of a chamber pot in a respectable home was considered unfortunate but acceptable. The smell of a respectable person's unwashed body masked with perfume was fine. But the smell of working-class bodies or tenement housing was considered proof of moral failing and lack of civilization. According to Professor Smith, this meant that middle and upper-class Victorians could live with significant bedroom odours while still considering themselves clean and civilized, because they used the appropriate masking scents and maintained the appearance of cleanliness. The smell wasn't the problem. Failing to mask it appropriately, or failing to pretend it wasn't there, was the problem. Professor Smith's research documents that some Victorian reformers did try to address bedroom odour issues by advocating for better ventilation, more frequent bathing, and improved sanitation. But these reformers faced resistance from medical establishment, from cultural norms about modesty and the body, and from the sheer practical difficulty of changing long-established habits and infrastructure. According to Professor Smith, it wasn't until germ theory became widely accepted in the late Victorian period and early Edwardian era that attitudes really began to shift. Once people understood that smells might indicate actual disease, causing bacteria rather than merely being unpleasant, motivation to improve cleanliness and reduce odours increased significantly. Think about living in a society that acknowledges bedroom smells are unpleasant, but considers them inevitable and not particularly problematic, where the solution to smell is perfume rather than washing, where maintaining the fiction of cleanliness matters more than actual cleanliness, where you breathe odorous bedroom air night after night, because that is simply how bedrooms are. Now let me tell you about sick rooms and how illness-intensified Victorian bedroom smells dramatically. According to research by Professor Anne Summers from the University of London, whose work examines Victorian nursing and healthcare, when someone was ill in a Victorian home, they would be confined to their bedroom for days, weeks, or even months, and the bedroom would become saturated with the smells of illness added to all the usual bedroom odours. Professor Summers' research reveals that sick people in Victorian bedrooms would be unable to leave their beds for chamber pot use, meaning bedpans and urinals would be used in the bed itself. The smell of fresh urine and feces would be even more prominent than in a healthy person's bedroom, because waste was being produced and contained right in the sleeping space. Bedpans might sit on bedside tables waiting to be emptied, intensifying the smell. According to Professor Summers, illness produced its own distinctive smells that mixed with bedroom odours. Fever created particularly pungent sweat that had a different smell than regular perspiration, sharp, almost sickly sweet. Respiratory illnesses produced phlegm and mucus that patients would expel into handkerchiefs or basins adding those smells to the room. Digestive illnesses created vomit or diarrhea, smells that no amount of cleaning could fully eliminate from bedroom fabrics. Professor Summers's research documents specific Victorian descriptions of sick room smells. A nurse's manual from 1888 describes the clothes-heavy smell of a sick room and recommends frequent airing, but acknowledges that the smell of illness clings to rooms and is difficult to dissipate. Florence Nightingale, in her influential nursing texts, wrote extensively about sick-room air quality and odour, describing how the smell of the sick combined with other bedroom smells to create nearly unbearable conditions. According to Professor Summers, medications and treatments added their own smells to Victorian sick rooms. Carbolic acid used as a disinfectant had a distinctive sharp chemical smell. Poultices and plasters applied to the chest or back for respiratory ailments smelled of mustard, camphor, or other strong ingredients. Liniments rubbed on aching joints or muscles added menthol or turpentine smells. A sick room would smell of illness, waste, unwashed patient, medications, and treatments, all layered together. Professor Summers's research reveals that long-term sicknesses created persistent smell problems. A person confined to bed for weeks or months couldn't bathe properly. Their body would smell intensely of unwashed skin, and this smell would permeate bed linens that couldn't be changed as frequently because moving a seriously ill person was difficult. The mattress would absorb sweat and other bodily fluids. The entire room would become saturated with the smell of long-term illness. Think about being confined to bed with illness in a Victorian bedroom, unable to bathe, using a bedpan, sweating with fever, your unwashed body and soiled linens, creating smells that intensify day after day. Or think about caring for a sick family member, entering their bedroom and being hit with the layered smells of illness, waste, unwashed body and medicines, all combined in the close air of a sick room. Let me tell you about death in Victorian bedrooms and the specific smells associated with dying and death at home. According to research by Professor Pat Jalland from the Australian National University, whose work examines Victorian death and mourning, most Victorians died at home in their own beds, and the process of dying and the immediate aftermath created intense odour situations in bedrooms. Professor Jalland's research reveals that the dying process often involved loss of bodily control. People dying from various diseases might lose bladder or bowel control, creating waste smells in the bedroom. The smell of approaching death, what some Victorians called the death smell, was reportedly distinctive, a combination of metabolic changes as the body shut down, creating a sweet sour odour that people who had sat with dying relatives learned to recognise. According to Professor Jalland, after death, bodies were typically kept in the home for several days before burial, usually remaining in the bedroom where death occurred. In the hours and days after death, decomposition would begin, creating increasingly strong odours. Victorian families would try to mask these smells with flowers, vinegar, or carbolic acid, but in summer particularly, decomposition smells would become quite strong. Professor Jalland's research documents Victorian descriptions of death, smell in letters and diaries. A widow writing in 1879 described sitting with her dying husband and being aware of a peculiar smell, unlike any other, that told me the end was near. Another Victorian diary entry from 1883 describes the family bedroom after a father's death as having the smell of flowers and something else beneath, something we did not speak of but all knew. According to Professor Jalland, the bedroom where someone had died and lain before burial would retain death smells for weeks afterwards, despite cleaning and airing. The smell would have penetrated fabrics, wood and plaster. Some families would completely redecorate bedrooms after deaths, replacing wallpaper, curtains, and sometimes even mattresses and furniture to eliminate the persistent smell of death. Think about the Victorian experience of death smells in bedrooms. The smell of a family member dying over days or weeks, the smell of the body remaining in the house for days, the persistent death, smell clinging to the bedroom afterwards. Death happened in bedrooms, and bedrooms carried the smell of it. Now, let me tell you about elderly people's bedrooms and how age-related factors created particular odour conditions. According to research by Professor Pat Thane from the University of London, whose work examines old age in Victorian society, elderly Victorians often spent increasing amounts of time in their bedrooms as mobility declined, and these bedrooms developed distinctive and intensified odour problems. Professor Thane's research reveals that elderly people who were bedridden or had limited mobility would spend most of their time in their bedrooms, meaning these rooms accumulated smells more intensely than bedrooms of mobile people. An elderly person might spend 16, 18 or even 20 hours, puddled and why in their bedroom, continuously adding body odour, breath odour and chamber pot use to the space with minimal airing or cleaning. According to Professor Thane, age-related incontinence meant that many elderly people's bedrooms smelled strongly of urine beyond the usual chamber pot odours. Bedding might be soiled with urine that was difficult to fully clean. Elderly people might not be able to use chamber pots effectively, leading to accidents and spills that soaked into bedroom floors or carpets. The persistent smell of urine in elderly people's bedrooms was often mentioned in Victorian sources, but rarely openly discussed. Professor Thane's research documents that elderly people bathed even less frequently than younger adults. An elderly person might be unable to get in and out of a bath safely, meaning full bathing essentially stopped. They might receive sponge baths from family or servants, but these didn't address body odour as effectively as full bathing. The smell of an elderly unwashed body skin odour, body oils, perhaps the smell of age-related skin changes, would be particularly intense. According to Professor Thane, medications and medical conditions added their own smells to elderly bedrooms. Older people might use various liniments, salves, or pills that had distinctive odours. Medical conditions might produce distinctive smells, diabetes creating a sweetish smell, kidney problems creating a urinous smell, digestive issues creating fecal odours. These medical smells layered with the usual bedroom odours. Professor Thane's research reveals that Victorian families often struggled with elderly relatives' bedroom smells, but felt unable to address them openly. It would be considered disrespectful to comment on an elderly parent's or grandparents' body odour or bedroom smell, so families would endure visits to smelly elderly bedrooms, breathing through their mouths, opening windows when they could, but never directly addressing the source of the odours. Think about visiting your elderly Victorian grandparent in their bedroom, where they spend most of their time. The smell of unwashed elderly body and urine and medications all combined in the close air, sitting with them trying not to show your reaction to the smell, breathing shallowly and hoping they can't tell you find their room odorous. Let me tell you about newly married couples and how Victorian wedding nights and honeymoons involved navigating bedroom smell situations in intimate circumstances. According to research by Professor Jenny Calder from the National Museums of Scotland, whose work examines Victorian marriage and sexuality, Victorian wedding nights involved two people who had likely never seen each other fully unclothed, and who now had to share a bed while dealing with all the usual Victorian bedroom smell issues plus the anxieties and bodily functions of wedding nights. Professor Calder's research reveals that Victorian brides and grooms came to the marital bed carrying all the body odours of unwashed bodies, masked with perfumes and powders. A bride might have bathed in the days before her wedding, but not on the wedding day itself. Full bathing on one's wedding day wasn't standard practice. Both bride and groom would smell of their bodies underneath their wedding finery. According to Professor Calder, the wedding night bedroom would have all the usual Victorian bedroom smells, chamber pot, closed windows, heavy curtains and fabrics trapping odours, plus the particular intensity of two people experiencing physical intimacy for the first time. Sweat from nervousness and exertion would add to body odours. Sexual fluids would add their own smells to the bed linens. The morning after bedroom would smell of bodies, sex, and chamber pot, and both bride and groom would have to navigate this olfactory reality while adjusting to married life. Professor Calder's research documents that Victorian advice literature for brides sometimes mentioned the importance of personal sweetness, without giving practical advice about how to achieve it with limited bathing. Brides were told to use powder and perfume, but not told to bathe frequently or wash intimate areas before bed. The gap between the ideal of bridal purity and the reality of unwashed bodies sharing a bed was significant. According to Professor Calder, honeymoon bedrooms in hotels or at family country houses created additional smell anxieties because couples were sleeping in unfamiliar rooms that carried previous occupants' smells. A honeymoon bedroom might smell of other people's bodies and chamber pot use, and the newly married couple had to sleep and be intimate in these spaces while managing their own contribution to the odour landscape. Think about a Victorian wedding night. You and your new spouse in bed together for the first time, both of you carrying the smell of unwashed bodies under perfume, the bedroom smelling of chamber pot and closed air, navigating physical intimacy while very aware of bodily smells and functions. Neither of you able to acknowledge openly the olfactory reality of what is happening. Now let me tell you about widows and widowers living alone and how single-person bedrooms developed their own smell characteristics. According to research by Professor Pat Jalland, widowed Victorians often kept their deceased spouse's bedroom much as it had been at death, creating rooms that became frozen in time and that developed distinctive stale, unused smells mixed with a persistent sense of the departed. Professor Jalland's research reveals that Victorian mourning customs meant widows and widowers might keep their late spouse's bedroom closed and unused, like a shrine. These rooms would develop the particular musty smell of spaces that aren't aired or lived in dust, stale air, aging fabrics. But they would also retain smells from when the room was occupied. The deceased spouse's perfumes or pomades, their body odours absorbed into fabrics, the general smell of their living presence that gradually faded but never entirely disappeared. According to Professor Jalland, widowed people who did continue to sleep in the marital bedroom faced different smell situations. Without a spouse's body adding its smells to the bed, the bedroom would smell only of the single sleeper, but the mattress and bed curtains would retain absorbed smells from the deceased spouse, creating a kind of ghost smell that some widowed people found comforting and others found disturbing. Professor Jalland's research documents Victorian widows and widowers' writings about bedroom smells after spousal death. A widow's diary from 1885 mentions still being able to smell her late husband's pomade in their bedroom 6 months after his death, finding the smell both painful and precious. A widower's letter from 1892 describes moving to a different bedroom because he couldn't bear the smell of his wife's perfume that lingered in their marital chamber. Think about the particular sadness of smell in widowed Victorian bedrooms. Either the preserved smell of a deceased spouse in a shrine-like room, or the absence of their smell in a bed that once held two bodies and now holds only one, or the decision to eliminate their smell by changing rooms or redecorating, accepting that even the scent memory of them is fading. Let me tell you about visitors' experiences with Victorian bedroom smells and how guests navigated staying in bedrooms that smelled of previous occupants or of unfamiliar household odours. According to research by Professor Judith Flanders, Victorian hospitality involved giving guests bedrooms to stay in, and these guest bedrooms presented particular smell challenges for both hosts and visitors. Professor Flanders' research reveals that Victorian guest bedrooms were often rooms that weren't used regularly between visits, meaning they could develop the musty smell of closed, unused spaces. When opened for guests, these rooms would need airing, but the mustiness might not fully dissipate. A guest would arrive to a bedroom that smelled of disuse, mixed with the smell of previous guests, and the general household scent. According to Professor Flanders, each household had its own distinctive smell based on cleaning products used, foods cooked, heating methods, and the combined scents of family members. When you visited someone's home, their bedroom smells would be foreign to you. Their chamber pot would have a different smell than yours, same basic urine smell, but with the distinctive scent of a different body. Their bed linens would smell of their laundering methods and their household water. Everything would smell subtly wrong because it wasn't your familiar home smells. Professor Flanders' research documents Victorian visitors' comments about bedroom smells in letters and diaries. A woman visiting relatives in 1878 wrote that their guest bedroom had a particular smell I find rather unpleasant, though I can't quite identify it. Another Victorian letter from a guest describes being unable to sleep well in an unfamiliar bed, partly because the room has a close smell, quite different from my own chamber. According to Professor Flanders, using another household's chamber pot created particular intimacy and discomfort. You were urinating into a pot that other members of the household had used, that carried their urine smell residues, that would sit in your guest room until morning when their servants emptied it. The mixing of your bodily smells with their household smells was intimate in ways that made some Victorians uncomfortable. Professor Flanders' research reveals that Victorian hosts worried about their guests finding their bedrooms smelly. Before guests arrived, families would air guest rooms, change linens, use extra perfumes or cleaning products, but they couldn't fully eliminate the smell characteristics of their household. A guest would smell your family's particular combination of odours, and you would worry about what they thought of it. Think about staying as a guest in a Victorian home, sleeping in a bedroom that smells of people you don't know, using a chamber pot that smells of strangers' urine, lying in bed aware that the sheets, though fresh, smell slightly of someone else's laundering methods, breathing air that smells of another family's particular combination of bodies and perfumes and household odours. Now, let me tell you about differences between urban and rural Victorian bedroom smells and how location affected the olfactory environment. According to research by Professor Asa Briggs from the University of Sussex, whose work examines Victorian cities and society, urban and rural bedrooms had different smell profiles based on air quality, water access, fuel sources, and proximity to various environmental factors. Professor Briggs's research reveals that urban Victorian bedrooms, especially in industrial cities, had air quality affected by external pollution. Coal smoke, factory emissions, and general city smells would enter bedrooms even with windows closed, adding acrid, sooty smells to the usual bedroom odours. A London bedroom would smell of coal smoke mixed with body odour and chamber pot. A Manchester bedroom might smell of textile factory emissions mixed with household smells. According to Professor Briggs, urban bedrooms also dealt with smells from nearby neighbours in tightly packed housing. You might smell other families cooking, their coal fires, their waste disposal. In tenement buildings, smells from other apartments would seep through thin walls and floors. Your bedroom might smell not just of your own household, but of multiple households, combined odours. Professor Briggs's research documents that rural Victorian bedrooms had different smell characteristics. Country bedrooms might smell of farm animals, if the house was near stables or barns. The smell of manure, hay, and livestock would mix with household smells. Rural bedrooms might be damp from proximity to fields and streams, creating musty smells. But rural air was generally cleaner, without urban coal smoke and factory pollution. According to Professor Briggs, water quality affected bedroom smells differently in urban and rural areas. Urban water was often badly polluted, and washing with polluted water could leave smells in bed linens and on bodies. Rural water from wells or springs was often cleaner, potentially making laundered items smell fresher. But rural areas might lack convenient water access, meaning less frequent washing overall. Think about the difference between sleeping in an urban Victorian bedroom with windows closed against coal smoke, the room smelling of sooty London air mixed with body odour and chamber pot, versus sleeping in a rural Victorian bedroom, smelling of clean country air, but also of the manure heap in the nearby barn, both situations involving distinctive regional smell characteristics, added to universal Victorian bedroom odours. Let me tell you about specific historical figures and documented accounts of Victorian bedroom smells. According to research by Professor Catherine Hughes from the University of East Anglia, whose work examines Victorian biography, we have records of how specific Victorian people experienced and described their bedroom smells. Professor Hughes's research reveals that Charles Dickens, in letters to friends, complained about bedroom smells in hotels and boarding houses he stayed in while travelling. Dickens described an 1850 hotel room as having the foul smell of previous occupants, and wrote that he requested the windows be opened despite cold weather because the chamber pot smell was insupportable. His complaints show that even famous Victorians dealt with standard Victorian bedroom odour problems. According to Professor Hughes, Queen Victoria herself had servants who detailed morning routines that involved airing the Queen's bedroom to dissipate night smells. Royal household accounts mention purchases of lavender water and other scented products specifically for bedroom use. Even royalty lived with bedroom chamber pot smells and body odours that needed masking and airing. Professor Hughes's research documents that Florence Nightingale wrote extensively about bedroom air quality and smell in her nursing and sanitary reform works. Nightingale described bedrooms as poison chambers when inadequately ventilated and argued that many illnesses were caused or worsened by breathing the foul air of sleeping rooms. Her reform advocacy was partly motivated by her extensive experience with Victorian bedroom smells in hospitals and homes. According to Professor Hughes, Lewis Carroll mentioned bedroom chamber pot smells in letters, writing to a friend about staying in a house where the night necessities were most apparent to the nose, and expressing relief at returning to his own better, ventilated rooms. Even a writer famous for whimsy dealt with and commented on Victorian bedroom realities. Professor Hughes's research reveals that middle-class Victorian diarists regularly mentioned bedroom smells in their private writings. A Manchester businessman's diary from 1873 mentions the unpleasant morning smell of the bedroom as a routine discomfort. A governess's diary from 1881 describes moving her bed further from where the chamber pot sat because the smell was too strong for comfort. These private writings reveal that bedroom smells were acknowledged realities that people dealt with daily. Think about how even the most famous and privileged Victorians couldn't escape the bedroom smell problems of their era. Queens and authors, nurses and business people all lived with unwashed bodies, chamber pots, and inadequate ventilation, creating odorous sleeping spaces night after night. Let me tell you about Victorian bedroom furniture and how it absorbed and retained smells over years of use. According to research by Professor Clive Edwards from Loughborough University, whose work examines furniture history, Victorian bedrooms contained numerous pieces of upholstered and wooden furniture that acted as smell sponges, absorbing decades of bedroom odours and releasing them back into the air. Professor Edwards's research reveals that Victorian beds themselves were major smell retainers. The mattress stuffed with horsehair or wool or straw would absorb sweat, body oils, and other bodily fluids over years of use. Even with sheets covering the mattress, some absorption occurred. A mattress that had been in use for 10 or 20 years would contain a decade or two of accumulated body odours. According to Professor Edwards, bed curtains, heavy fabrics that hung around four-poster beds, were particular smell problems. These curtains were expensive and labour-intensive to clean, so they might be washed only once or twice a year at most. They hung around the bed absorbing nightly emissions of body odour, breath odour, chamber pot smells and perfumes. When you pulled the curtains closed at night, you were sealing yourself into a space saturated with accumulated odors. Professor Edwards' research documents that bedroom carpets and rugs absorbed smells from the floor-level chamber, pot spills and splashes, dust carrying dried urine particles, general household smells settling into fibers. Victorian carpets were difficult to clean thoroughly, typically just swept or occasionally beaten outdoors, not deep cleaned. Years of bedroom use meant carpets carried years of smell accumulation. According to Professor Edwards, wooden bedroom furniture also absorbed smells. Wood is porous, and bedroom dressers, wardrobes, and tables would absorb ambient bedroom odors over time. The smell would be subtle, but would contribute to the overall bedroom atmosphere. Furniture that had been in a bedroom for decades would smell faintly of all the bodies and chamber pots and perfumes that had shared the space with it. Professor Edwards' research reveals that bedroom wallpaper absorbed smells significantly. Victorian wallpapers were often made with porous materials that absorbed moisture and odours from the air. In a bedroom used for years, wallpaper would be saturated with bedroom smells. Victorians who completely redecorated bedrooms after deaths or illnesses were partly motivated by removing smell, saturated wallpaper. Think about your Victorian bedroom as a collection of smell, absorbent materials, mattress stuffed with organic materials, soaking up body odours year after year, heavy curtains hanging around your bed absorbing nightly emissions, carpet underfoot carrying dried urine and chamber pot splashes, wallpaper on the walls absorbing the general atmosphere, all of these surfaces acting as smell reservoirs that release accumulated odours back into the air you breathe. Now let me tell you about special occasions and how Victorian bedroom smells changed during holidays, celebrations, or other events. According to research by Professor John Burnett from Brunel University, whose work examines Victorian food and domestic life, special occasions might mean extra guests sleeping in bedrooms, different routines, and intensified smell situations as households accommodated more people. Professor Burnett's research reveals that when Victorian families had multiple guests for Christmas or other holidays, bedrooms might have extra beds or even multiple people sharing beds, intensifying smell accumulation. A bedroom with 3 people sleeping in it would have 3 times the body odor contribution, 3 times the chamber pot use, 3 times the perfume and pomade contribution. The smell would be noticeably more intense than with the usual 1 or 2 occupants. According to Professor Burnett, special occasions might also mean less attention to normal routines like morning bedroom airing and chamber pot emptying, as households focused on meal preparation and entertainment. Bedrooms might sit closed and unaired longer than usual, allowing smells to accumulate more intensely. The chamber pot might not be emptied until later in the day, sitting full longer. Professor Burnett's research documents that Christmas and New Year visiting meant using bedrooms in other people's homes, exposing you to their particular household smells. A Victorian Christmas diary from 1887 describes staying with relatives and noting that their bedchambers have a smell quite different from ours. Not unpleasant, but decidedly foreign. According to Professor Burnett, special occasions might also mean different foods being eaten, which would affect body odours and chamber pot smells. Rich holiday foods might cause digestive upset, making chamber pot contents smell particularly unpleasant. The smell of feast foods cooking would permeate the house, including bedrooms, mixing with usual bedroom odours. Think about Victorian Christmas with relatives visiting. 3 or 4 people sleeping in a bedroom meant for one. The smell of multiple unwashed bodies and chamber pot use intensified in the crowded space. Normal cleaning routines disrupted by holiday preparations. The bedroom becoming increasingly odorous as the celebration continues over several days. Let me tell you about the specific chemistry and biology behind Victorian bedroom smells and why they were so persistent and difficult to eliminate. According to research by Professor Mark Jenner from the University of York, whose work examines historical perceptions of smell, Understanding what actually created Victorian bedroom odours helps explain why they were so intense and why Victorian attempts to mask them were only partially successful. Professor Jenner's research reveals that human body odour is primarily created by bacteria breaking down sweat and oils on the skin surface. Fresh sweat is nearly odourless, but within hours, bacteria begin processing it into various smelly compounds. Without washing to remove these compounds and the bacteria producing them, the smell intensifies day after day. After a week without bathing, bacterial populations on the skin are enormous, and the smell production is correspondingly intense. According to Professor Jenner, different body areas produce different characteristic smells. Armpits produce particularly strong odour because they have high concentrations of apocrine sweat glands that secrete proteins and lipids that bacteria love to eat, producing especially pungent breakdown products. The groin area produces similar strong smells. Feet produce distinctive odours as bacteria break down dead skin and sweat in the warm enclosed environment of shoes. Professor Jenner's research documents that hair absorbs and holds odours particularly effectively. Your hair acts like a sponge for ambient smells and for the oils your scalp produces. Victorian hair unwashed for a week or more would smell intensely of scalp oil, absorbed environmental odours, and whatever pomades or oils had been applied. This smell would transfer to pillows and would be concentrated around the head of Victorian beds. According to Professor Jenner, breath odour contributed significantly to Victorian bedroom smells because Victorians had poor dental hygiene by modern standards. Without modern toothbrushing habits or dental care, people would develop significant tooth decay and gum disease, creating breath odours that intensified overnight when saliva production decreased during sleep. Morning breath in Victorian times was likely far more intense than modern morning breath. Professor Jenner's research reveals that chamber pot odours had their own complex chemistry. Fresh urine contains urea, which bacteria convert to ammonia through enzymatic action. This conversion begins almost immediately but accelerates over time, meaning chamber pots smelled progressively more strongly of ammonia the longer urine sat in them. The sharp, pungent smell of ammonia is difficult to ignore and can cause irritation to eyes and respiratory passages in high concentrations. According to Professor Jenner, feces contain numerous volatile compounds that smell intensely offensive to human noses, scatol and indole, which smell exactly as their names suggest, sulfur compounds like hydrogen sulfide, and various fatty acids. These compounds are produced by intestinal bacteria and are released when feces are deposited. Victorian chamber pots containing feces would smell strongly of this complex mixture. Professor Jenner's research documents that the combination of smells in Victorian bedrooms created what chemists call odour masking effects, where different smells interact. Perfumes didn't eliminate body odour or chamber pot smell, they just added another layer to the smell environment. The result was often worse than either smell alone, because the competing odours created complexity that the nose found even more disturbing. Think about the biological and chemical reality underlying Victorian bedroom. Smells millions of bacteria on unwashed skin producing smelly compounds, scalp oils and dead skin accumulating in unwashed hair, urine breaking down into ammonia, feces releasing sulfur compounds, all of this happening in an enclosed space where smells accumulated night after night. Now, let me tell you about Victorian prostitutes and working women whose bedroom smells involved additional layers related to their work. According to research by Professor Judith Walkowitz from Johns Hopkins University, whose work examines Victorian women and sexuality, women who worked as prostitutes or who lived in poverty had bedroom smell situations that reflected their difficult circumstances. Professor Walkowitz's research reveals that Victorian prostitutes often lived and worked in single rooms that functioned as both workspace and bedroom. These rooms would smell of multiple men's bodies and bodily fluids, mixed with the woman's own body and the various perfumes or cosmetics used to attract clients. The smell would be intensely sexual and human in ways that respectable Victorian bedroom smells theoretically weren't. According to Professor Walkowitz, working-class women employed in physically demanding jobs, factory workers, laundresses, domestic servants, would come home with bodies carrying the smells of their work. A laundress's bedroom might smell of lye soap and steam. A factory worker's bedroom might smell of the particular materials or chemicals she worked with. These work smells would layer with body odour and bedroom smells. Professor Walkowitz's research documents that women working as wet nurses, nursing other women's babies for pay, dealt with bedroom smells that included breast milk. Leaking breast milk would smell sour as it dried on nightclothes and bed linens. The particular smell of lactation sweet, but also somewhat organic and body fluid, would permeate these women's bedrooms. According to Professor Walkowitz, seamstresses and other women who did piecework at home would have bedrooms that doubled as workspaces, meaning bedroom smells mixed with work smells. A seamstress's bedroom might smell of fabric sizing and thread. A woman taking in laundry would have her bedroom smelling of other people's clothes and linens, adding strangers' body odours to her own bedroom environment. Think about the particular smell situations of Victorian women whose lives didn't fit the respectable middle-class ideal bedrooms, that smelled of sex work or physical labour or poverty, where the smell was intensified by difficult circumstances and lack of resources for managing cleanliness. Let me tell you about bachelor bedrooms and how men living alone created distinctive bedroom smell situations. According to research by Professor John Tosh from the University of Cambridge, whose work examines Victorian masculinity, bachelor men living without female household management developed bedroom smells that reflected their particular circumstances and habits. Professor Tosh's research reveals that Victorian bachelors often lived in lodgings or chambers where they had minimal domestic support. A bachelor might empty his own chamber pot or have only sporadic cleaning help. His bed linens might be changed infrequently. His bedroom would develop the smell of male body odour without the moderating influence of female domestic management. According to Professor Tosh, bachelor bedrooms were often also smoking rooms where men would smoke pipes or cigars while reading or relaxing in their nightclothes. This meant bedroom fabrics would be saturated with tobacco smoke in addition to other bedroom smells. The combination of male body odour, chamber pot, and heavy tobacco smell was characteristic of bachelor quarters. Professor Tosh's research documents that some Victorian bachelors kept pets that shared their bedrooms, adding animal smells to the bedroom environment. A bachelor might have a dog sleeping in his bedroom, contributing dog smell to the mix of odours. The combination of animal and human smells in unwashed spaces created particularly intense bedroom odours. According to Professor Tosh, bachelor bedrooms were sometimes mentioned in Victorian literature and journalism as particularly malodorous spaces that revealed the necessity of female domestic influence. The implication was that men couldn't maintain proper household cleanliness without women's management, and bachelor bedroom smells were cited as evidence. Think about the stereotype of the Victorian bachelor bedroom: unwashed male smell, tobacco smoke, possibly dog odour, chamber, pot odours, minimal cleaning or airing, the particular atmosphere of male spaces without domestic management. Now let me tell you about boarding house and hotel bedrooms, where transient occupants created particular smell challenges. According to research by Professor Lynn Vallone from Rutgers University, whose work examines Victorian domestic spaces, commercial sleeping spaces had distinctive smell problems because multiple strangers used the same rooms sequentially. Professor Vallone's research reveals that boarding house and hotel bedrooms would smell of all the previous occupants who had slept there. Each guest left their body odours in the mattress and fabrics, used the chamber pot, contributed their perfumes and pomades. Cleaning between guests didn't eliminate these absorbed smells. A hotel bedroom would smell like a compressed history of strangers' bodies. According to Professor Vallone, commercial lodgings often had less thorough cleaning than private homes because turnover was rapid and profit margins were tight. Chamber pots might be emptied but not fully cleaned. Bed linens might be reused for multiple guests before washing. The bedroom environment would be noticeably more odorous than a private home bedroom. Professor Vallone's research documents Victorian travellers' complaints about boarding house and hotel bedroom smells. Charles Dickens, as mentioned earlier, complained frequently about lodging smells in his correspondence. Other Victorian travellers wrote about being unable to sleep because of the smell of previous occupants or of inadequately cleaned chamber pots. According to Professor Vallone, some commercial lodgings tried to mask bedroom smells with heavy perfumes or aromatics, creating an atmosphere where artificial scent layered over body, and chamber pot smells in ways that were sometimes worse than the original odours. The attempt to create pleasant rooms for paying guests often just created differently unpleasant environments. Think about sleeping in a Victorian hotel bedroom knowing that dozens or hundreds of strangers have slept in the same bed, used the same chamber pot, left their body smells in the mattress you are lying on. The particular intimacy and disgust of sleeping in spaces saturated with unknown bodies' odours. Let me tell you about military barracks and institutional bedroom smells, where large numbers of men slept in close quarters. According to research by Professor Edward Spears from the University of Leeds, whose work examines Victorian military history, army barracks had bedroom smell problems that were extreme even by Victorian standards, because of overcrowding and inadequate facilities. Professor Spears's research reveals that Victorian army barracks often housed dozens of soldiers in single large sleeping rooms. These men would all be using chamber pots or shared latrine facilities, creating concentrated waste smells. Multiple unwashed male bodies in close proximity created intense body odour. The smell of military barracks was reportedly overwhelming to civilians who visited. According to Professor Spears, soldiers' uniforms and gear would add distinctive smells to barracks. Wool uniforms that were rarely cleaned, leather equipment that absorbed sweat, the smell of gun oil and metal. These military smells, mixed with body odours and waste smells, created the particular atmosphere of barracks life. Professor Spears's research documents military reform movements that specifically cited barracks smell as evidence of the need for improved soldier living conditions. Reformers described visiting barracks and being hit with the concentrated reek of unwashed men, and argued that such conditions harmed soldiers' health and morale. According to Professor Spears, similar smell problems existed in other Victorian institutions, workhouses, orphanages, prisons, hospitals. Anywhere that large numbers of people slept in crowded conditions with inadequate facilities would develop intense bedroom odours. The institutional smell of unwashed bodies, waste, and despair was distinctive and reportedly difficult to forget once experienced. Think about the particular intensity of institutional bedroom smells. Dozens of bodies in one space, minimal privacy for chamber pot use, inadequate cleaning, the smell of poverty or military life, or illness concentrated in sleeping spaces. Now let me tell you about Victorian advice, literature, and reform movements that addressed bedroom smells. According to research by Professor Eileen Clear from the University of Southern Mississippi, whose work examines Victorian domestic advice literature, some Victorian writers did attempt to address bedroom smell problems through advice books and sanitary reform movements. Professor Clear's research reveals that sanitary reformers in the 1870s and 1880s increasingly advocated for better bedroom ventilation, more frequent bathing, and improved waste disposal. These reformers argued that bedroom smells weren't just unpleasant but actively harmful to health. They recommended sleeping with windows cracked open, using better chamber pot designs, and bathing at least weekly. According to Professor Clear, domestic advice books for middle-class women included recommendations for managing bedroom smells. Daily airing of rooms use of lavender water and other scents, frequent changes of bed linens when possible, but these recommendations often acknowledged the practical difficulties of implementation given Victorian infrastructure and labour constraints. Professor Clear's research documents specific advice from Victorian sanitary reform texts. An 1883 health manual recommends that bedchambers should be thoroughly aired each morning, with windows thrown open for at least 30 minutes regardless of weather. Another advice book from 1889 suggests using carbolic powder in chamber pots to reduce offensive odours, and recommends daily washing of all body parts, even if full baths were impractical. According to Professor Clear, some Victorian reformers advocated for architectural changes to improve bedroom hygiene, better ventilation systems, indoor bathrooms, improved heating that would make window opening less punishing in winter. But these improvements were slow to be adopted and remained luxuries that only wealthy families could afford through the Victorian period. Professor Clear's research reveals that the late Victorian period did see gradual improvements in bedroom hygiene as germ theory gained acceptance and as infrastructure improved. By the 1890s and into the Edwardian era, more frequent bathing was becoming normal, indoor plumbing was spreading, and attitudes toward body odour and bedroom smells were shifting. But for most of the Victorian period, the smelly bedroom remained standard. Think about the gradual realization among Victorians that bedroom smells weren't just inevitable discomforts, but actual health hazards, and the slow process of changing infrastructure and habits to address problems that had been accepted for generations. Let me tell you about how we know about Victorian bedroom smells, and what sources reveal these intimate details of daily life. According to research by Professor James Vernon from the University of California, Berkeley, whose work examines Victorian sensory history, historians reconstruct Victorian smell experiences through careful reading of diaries, letters, medical texts, sanitary reports, advice literature, and literature. Professor Vernon's research reveals that Victorians wrote about smells more openly in private documents than in public ones. Diaries and personal letters contain frank descriptions of bedroom odours that wouldn't appear in published works. These private writings reveal that people were very aware of bedroom smells even if social conventions prevented open discussion. According to Professor Vernon, medical and sanitary reform literature provides detailed descriptions of bedroom smells in the context of health concerns. These texts describe the foul air of sleeping chambers and the effluvium of night with clinical precision, providing evidence about what bedrooms actually smelled like and how intensely. Professor Vernon's research documents that Victorian literature sometimes referenced bedroom smells indirectly through euphemisms and implications. A reference to the close atmosphere of the sick room or the morning freshening of chambers indicates smell situations without stating them directly. Learning to read these Victorian circumlocutions reveals a lot about bedroom smell realities. According to Professor Vernon, physical evidence also tells us about Victorian bedroom smells. Analysis of Victorian chamber pots, bed linens, and bedroom furnishings sometimes reveals traces of the substances that created smells. Historical buildings sometimes retain absorbed odours in old wood and fabrics, though most Victorian bedroom smells have long since dissipated. Think about how historians piece together the sensory reality of Victorian bedrooms from fragments of evidence, a diary entry about chamber pot smell, a medical text's description of bedroom air, a reformer's complaint about inadequate ventilation, a letter's euphemistic reference to morning unpleasantness, all combining to create a picture of rooms saturated with body odour, chamber pot ammonia, and desperate perfumes. Let me tell you one more set of stories that brings this all together: specific mornings in Victorian bedrooms, and what the progression from night to day smelled like. According to research by Professor Amanda Vickery from Queen Mary University of London, whose work examines Victorian women's daily lives, The transition from night to morning in Victorian bedrooms involved a particular sequence of smells and activities that reveals the full reality of bedroom hygiene. Professor Vickery's research reveals that Victorian mornings in bedrooms began with awareness of the accumulated night smells, even before fully waking. As you moved from sleep to consciousness, you would become aware of the thick, close smell of the bedroom, your own body odour, your partner's body odour if married, the chamber pot smell, the stale perfume smell, all trapped in the closed room overnight. According to Professor Vickery, when you opened your eyes in a Victorian bedroom, the first thing you might see would be a servant opening heavy curtains, and the first thing you would smell would be the intensified morning version of all the night's accumulated odours. The servant might visibly react to the smell, a subtle wrinkling of the nose, a quicker than necessary movement to the windows to throw them open, revealing that the smell was noticeable even to someone accustomed to Victorian bedroom environments. Professor Vickery's research documents specific Victorian descriptions of morning bedroom experiences. A governess's diary from 1878 describes waking and being aware that the room needed immediate airing, the night smell being quite strong. A gentleman's journal from 1882 mentions his morning routine, beginning with his valet throwing open the windows despite the cold, the room requiring freshening after the night. According to Professor Vickery, the act of opening windows in Victorian mornings was both practical and symbolic. It marked the transition from private nighttime space to daytime respectability. The rush of cold morning air would begin to dissipate the concentrated bedroom smells, and you would feel the relief of breathing fresher air after hours of breathing the close atmosphere of the sealed bedroom. Professor Vickery's research reveals that morning washing routines involved confronting your own body smell directly. When you washed your face, hands and neck with water from the basin, you would smell the accumulated oils and odours being rinsed away. The smell of soap mixing with body odour created a transitional smell, not yet clean by modern standards, but cleaner than the unwashed state. According to Professor Vickery, putting on day clothes after night clothes involved a change in smell as well as appearance. Your day clothes, while not freshly laundered every day, were separate from the night clothes that had absorbed your sleep smells. Getting dressed marked a smell transition from night body to day body, from bedroom smells to the smells you would carry into the public world. Think about the Victorian morning as a smell journey, from the concentrated odours of sealed nighttime bedroom, to the rush of cold air when windows open, to the smell of washing water and soap on skin, to the different smell of day clothes replacing night clothes. Each step marking a transition from private smell reality to public smell presentation. Now let me tell you about how modern people react when they encounter preserved Victorian bedrooms, or reenact Victorian bedroom condition. According to research by Professor Sally Pointer, a historian who conducts Victorian domestic life reenactments, modern people who try to live as Victorians did are consistently shocked by how quickly bedroom smells develop and how intense they become. Professor Pointer's research reveals that in Victorian living experiments where participants don't bathe for a week or more, use chamber pots, and sleep in sealed rooms, the smell accumulation is one of the most difficult aspects for modern people to tolerate. Participants report being very aware of their own body odour and bedroom smells in ways they never are in normal modern life. According to Professor Pointer, modern people participating in Victorian reenactments often comment that the smell is worse than they imagined, despite having read about Victorian conditions. The abstract knowledge that Victorians rarely bathed is different from the lived experience of your own unwashed body, smelling strongly after just a few days. The reality of chamber pot smell in your bedroom is more unpleasant than descriptions prepared participants for. Professor Pointer's research documents that museum professionals who work with Victorian bedroom furnishings sometimes report that old mattresses, bed curtains, and other bedroom fabrics can still carry faint absorbed smells even after more than a century, while most Victorian bedroom smells have dissipated. Some deeply absorbed odours in porous materials can persist for extremely long periods. According to Professor Pointer, historical interpreters at Victorian house museums face the challenge of explaining bedroom smell realities to visitors who assume that elegant Victorian bedrooms would have smelled pleasant. The disconnect between the visual beauty of preserved Victorian bedrooms and the smell reality those rooms would have had when occupied creates cognitive dissonance for modern visitors. Think about the gap between visiting a museum's pristine Victorian bedroom, all cleaned and preserved and smelling only of old building and furniture polish, and what that same room would have smelled like when actually occupied. The beautiful bed with its elaborate curtains would have smelled of accumulated body odours. The elegant chamber pot on display would have smelled of urine. Everything beautiful would have been odorous. Let me tell you about the legacy of Victorian bedroom, smells in our modern anxieties, about cleanliness and odour. According to research by Professor Nancy Tomes from Stony Brook University, whose work examines the history of hygiene in America and Britain, our modern obsession with freshness, cleanliness, and eliminating body odour is partly a reaction to Victorian conditions and the horror of living as our recent ancestors did. Professor Tomes's research reveals that the shift from Victorian infrequent bathing to modern daily showering happened relatively quickly in the early to mid-20th century. As running water became common and germ theory spread, people rapidly adopted more frequent bathing and developed intolerance for the body odours that Victorians had accepted. Within 1 or 2 generations, what had been normal became intolerable. According to Professor Tomes, the modern bathroom industry, deodorant industry, and air freshener industry all developed partly in reaction to Victorian smell conditions. Products that mask or eliminate body odour, that keep bathrooms fresh, that make bedrooms smell artificially clean. All of these reflect cultural trauma from the smelly recent past and determination never to smell like our grandparents or great-grandparents did. Professor Tomes's research documents that early 20th century advertising for bathroom fixtures, deodorants, and cleaning products often played on fears of smelling bad or having one's home smell bad. These ads implicitly referenced Victorian conditions even when not stating it directly. The nightmare scenario of smelling like the unwashed past was used to sell modern hygiene products. According to Professor Tomes, our modern anxiety about personal smell, the concern about whether we smell okay, the use of multiple products to eliminate or mask body odour, the horror at the thought of someone smelling our bodily functions, all of this is culturally recent and reflects post-Victorian hygiene consciousness. Victorians would find our smell, anxiety strange because they didn't share it. Professor Tomes's research reveals that modern bedrooms reflect post-Victorian smell consciousness. We expect bedrooms to smell fresh or neutral. We're disturbed by chamber pot equivalents being anywhere near sleeping spaces. We wash bed linens weekly or more often. We shower daily or more often. Every aspect of our bedroom hygiene represents a reaction against Victorian condition. Think about how your modern bedroom, with its neutral smell or artificial air freshener scent, with its weekly laundered linens, with your daily showered body climbing into bed, represents a complete reversal of Victorian bedroom reality. You live in a world shaped by revulsion at how your ancestors lived, by determination to escape the smells that were normal for them. Let me tell you about the specific moments when Victorian bedroom smells would be at their absolute worst. The peak odour situations that reveal just how intense these environments could become. According to research by Professor Alison Matthews David from Ryerson University, whose work examines Victorian dress and domestic spaces, certain circumstances would create particularly overwhelming bedroom smell situations that pushed even Victorian tolerance to its limits. Professor Matthews David's research reveals that summer heat waves created bedroom smell crises. On nights when temperatures remained in the 80s or 90s Fahrenheit, with high humidity, Victorian bedrooms would become nearly unbearable. Bodies would sweat profusely, soaking nightclothes and bed linens. The heat would intensify decomposition of urine in chamber pots, creating ammonia concentrations that would sting the eyes. Perfumes and pomades would turn rancid. The combination of heat, moisture, and intensified smells created atmospheres that some Victorians described as physically oppressive. According to Professor Matthews David, during summer heat waves, even Victorians who normally kept windows closed would sometimes open them despite beliefs about dangerous night air. The alternative sealed rooms in extreme heat with maximally intense odours were simply too much. Heat wave nights would see Victorian families sprawling on top of their beds rather than under covers, trying to find relief from both heat and smell. Professor Matthews David's research documents specific summer bedroom experiences from Victorian diaries. An 1868 diary entry from London describes a July night where the heat was stifling and the smell of the bedroom quite insupportable. We opened the window despite the risk and lay upon the bed in our shifts, unable to bear the usual bedclothes or the close air. Another diary from Manchester in 1876 describes a heat wave where the family slept in their garden rather than endure bedrooms that smelled like something had died there. According to Professor Matthews David, winter presented different peak smell situations. On the coldest nights, Victorians would seal windows tight and might even seal chimney flues to preserve heat. In these completely sealed rooms, odour accumulation would reach extreme levels by morning. The smell would be so intense that servants opening bedrooms would sometimes step back from the rush of accumulated foul air when doors were opened. Professor Matthews David's research reveals that illness created the most extreme bedroom smell situations. When someone was seriously ill in bed for weeks, unable to properly bathe or move, using bedpans continuously, taking medicines that smelled strongly, the bedroom would develop what Victorians called the smell of death, even before death occurred. These sick room smells combining illness, waste, unwashed body, medications and despair were described as uniquely terrible, worse than any combination of normal bedroom odours. According to Professor Matthews David, childbirth created particular bedroom smell intensities. Victorian women gave birth in their bedrooms, and the process of labour and delivery created blood smells, amniotic fluid smells, and other birth-related odours that would saturate the bedroom. Post-birth, women would remain in bed for weeks during lying-in period, using bedpans, bleeding heavily into sanitary cloths, producing breast milk that would leak and smell sour. Birth chambers during lying-in had reputation for particularly powerful odours. Think about the worst Victorian bedroom smell situations. Het wave nights with sweat-soaked bodies in sealed rooms. Winter mornings after completely sealed freezing nights. Sick rooms where someone lay dying for weeks. Birth chambers during lying-in periods. Even in a society that accepted bedroom odours as normal, these extreme situations created smells that taxed even Victorian tolerance. Let me tell you one final story that encapsulates the Victorian bedroom smell experience. According to Professor Judith Flanders, imagine you are a middle-class Victorian woman on a typical winter night in 1875. It is 9 p.m. and you are preparing for bed. The bedroom is cold despite the small fire burning in the grate, but you close the windows tight against the dangerous night air. Professor Flanders' research helps us reconstruct this scene. You've been wearing your dress all day, the same dress you wore yesterday and the day before, because you have only a few dresses and they're not washed frequently. The dress smells of your body odour from several days of wear, mixed with the lavender powder you dusted yourself with this morning, mixed with the smells of the house, cooking smells, coal smoke, general household odour. According to Professor Flanders, you undress with your maid's help, removing the multiple layers of your day clothes. As each layer comes off, you are aware of the concentrated body smell that has been trapped under the fabric all day. Your chemise worn next to your skin smells particularly strongly of sweat and body oils. You haven't bathed fully in 2 weeks. Tomorrow is your scheduled bath day, but tonight you go to bed unwashed, except for your face and hands. Professor Flanders' research reveals what happens next. You put on your nightgown, the same nightgown you've worn for the past 5 nights. It smells of previous night's sleep, sweat, and body odor, a concentrated essence of your sleeping smell. You climb into bed into sheets that haven't been changed in 10 days. Sheets that carry accumulated body oils and odors from you and your husband. According to Professor Flanders, your husband climbs into bed beside you. He hasn't bathed in 3 weeks. His body smells of male sweat and the heavy pomade in his hair. He used his chamber pot before bed, and even with the pot pushed back under the bed, you can smell the sharp ammonia smell of urine. The room smells of coal smoke from the dying fire, of body odors from both of you, of chamber pot, of lavender powder, all mixed in the closed cold air. Professor Flanders' research documents what this moment felt like. You pull the heavy blankets up, blankets that haven't been washed in months and that carry their own accumulated smells. You lie beside your husband in the darkness. The bed curtains are drawn, enclosing you in the concentrated smell of the bed. This is your sleeping environment. This is normal. This is how bedrooms are. You drift off to sleep, breathing this mixture of human smells. And in the morning a servant will open the windows, and the cycle will begin again. Think about this scene playing out in Victorian bedrooms throughout England and America and Europe, night after night, year after year, decade after decade. Millions of people climbing into smelly beds in smelly rooms, accepting it as simply how life is, never imagining that their great-grandchildren would sleep in fresh-aired rooms, in freshly showered bodies, in weekly laundered linens. Let me tell you one last detail that brings this all into focus. The specific moment when you would become fully aware of your Victorian bedroom's smell. According to research by Professor Carolyn Steedman from the University of Warwick, Victorians experienced their bedroom smells most intensely in moments of transition, when entering from outside, when waking in the morning, when returning after time away. Professor Steedman's research reveals that when you entered your bedroom from outside on a cold day, the contrast between outdoor air and bedroom air would be striking. The bedroom would smell noticeably of all its accumulated odors, body, chamber pot, perfume, in a way you might not notice when you'd been in the room continuously. Your nose would adjust quickly, but that first moment of entry would make you very aware of how your bedroom smelled. According to Professor Steedman, waking in the morning involved a similar moment of smell, awareness. As you transition from sleep to waking, your sense of smell would reactivate before you fully opened your eyes, and you would become aware of the bedroom smell, the close, thick air, the chamber pot odor, the smell of your own sleep, body and your partner's. This morning, smell awareness was so common that Victorian sources reference it regularly as just a normal part of waking. Professor Steedman's research documents that returning home after travel created the most intense smell awareness. If you'd been away from home for days or weeks, staying in other bedrooms, your own bedroom's particular smell would strike you forcefully when you returned. Every bedroom had its own smell signature based on its occupants, its furnishings, its particular combination of odors, and you would recognize your bedroom partly by how it smelled. Even though you might not consciously think about this, think about those moments of heightened smell, awareness, entering your bedroom from cold outdoor air and being hit with its particular indoor smell, waking in the morning to the close atmosphere of accumulated night odors, coming home after travel and recognizing your bedroom partly by its familiar smell. These transition moments revealed what you'd become nose blind to: the constant odor reality of Victorian bedroom life. Let me tell you one more important truth about Victorian bedroom smells that brings everything together. According to research by Professor Judith Flanders, the most poignant aspect of Victorian bedroom smell reality was how completely normalized it became for the people living in it. You didn't think of your bedroom as smelly. It was just your bedroom. The smell was so constant, so universal, so unavoidable that it became invisible to Victorian consciousness, even while being physically present every night. Professor Flanders's research reveals that Victorians wrote about fresh air and pleasant breezes and sweet-smelling homes in their idealized descriptions. But these descriptions existed alongside the daily reality of chamber pots and unwashed bodies. The language of Victorian domestic ideals created a fiction of cleanliness and freshness that everyone participated in, even while living in quite different sensory reality. According to Professor Flanders, this disconnect between ideal and reality created a peculiar doubling in Victorian consciousness. You knew intellectually that bedrooms smelled. The evidence was undeniable every morning when windows were opened, but socially and psychologically, you maintained the fiction that bedrooms were pristine private spaces, refuges of domestic comfort and refinement. Both truths coexisted without apparent contradiction. Professor Flanders's research documents that this psychological adaptation, accepting smell reality while maintaining cleanliness fiction, was how Victorians managed to live with conditions that would be intolerable if consciously acknowledged. If you admitted to yourself every night how bad your bedroom smelled, how uncomfortable the conditions really were, the psychological burden would be too great. So you adapted, normalized, accepted, and created a mental framework where the smell simply wasn't that important. Think about the psychological skill this required, living every night with body odor, chamber pot smell, and stale perfume, while maintaining a self-image as a clean, refined, respectable person living in a proper home. The Victorian bedroom smell reality reveals not just historical hygiene facts, but something profound about human adaptability and the power of social norms to shape even our most private sensory experiences. So as you drift off tonight, I want you to think about the gap between Victorian ideals of respectability and refinement and the odorous reality of their private spaces, the elegant bedrooms in paintings and photographs, the refined ladies and gentlemen in portraits. They all lived with bedroom smells that would send most modern people running for fresh air. The Victorians dealt with these smells every night because their medical understanding told them frequent bathing was dangerous, because their infrastructure made laundry difficult, because their social codes prevented open discussion of bodily functions, and because they had normalized odors that we would find intolerable. Their experience reminds us how much our sense of what is acceptable or normal is shaped by the infrastructure and knowledge we have access to. Rest now, grateful for modern plumbing that eliminates chamber pots from bedrooms, for easy access to showers and baths that let you wash frequently, for washing machines that make clean linens and nightclothes readily available, for understanding of hygiene that motivates cleanliness. The Victorians would have envied not your phone or computer, but your clean, fresh-smelling bedroom where you can sleep breathing air, free of body odor, chamber pot ammonia, and rancid perfumes. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, breathe deeply the clean air of your modern bedroom. Think about how remarkable it is that you can wash daily, that your sheets are fresh, that no chamber pot sits in your room, that your bedroom smells of nothing in particular rather than of accumulated human existence. The Victorian bedroom, with all its visual elegance in paintings and photographs, was a space where smells told the real story, where the gap between appearance and reality was measured in layers of body odor, chamber pot ammonia, and desperate perfume. The elegant four-poster beds, the heavy curtains, the beautiful chamber pots displayed in museums, all of these carried smells that we can barely imagine now. The refined Victorian lady in her portrait wore a dress that smelled of days of body odour. The distinguished Victorian gentleman in his photograph went weeks without bathing. They all climbed into beds that smelled of accumulated sleep and bodies, in rooms that smelled of waste and humanity, night after night after night. Their world was one where smell was accepted, where perfume was survival, where the fiction of cleanliness mattered more than the reality. They lived in a sensory environment so different from ours that we struggle to imagine it, even though it was only 4 or 5 generations ago. Your great-grandmother probably slept in smelly sheets. Your great-great-grandfather probably had a chamber pot under his bed. This is recent history, not ancient past, and yet we've changed so completely that Victorian bedroom smells seem almost impossible to us. We can't imagine sleeping in those conditions, can't imagine accepting them as normal. Our revolution in hygiene and infrastructure has been so thorough that we've forgotten what normal smelled like for thousands of years of human history. The clean, fresh-smelling bedroom is a modern miracle that most of human history never experienced. Sweet dreams and good night. May your sleep be peaceful, your bedroom air fresh and clean, and your rest be deep and undisturbed by any thought of chamber pots or unwashed bodies. Sweet dreams and good night.